The second part of the question was about justice. Yeah? There is this principle of free will, which is a very, very basic principle, I feel, and that is this. If you exercise your will out of harmony with love, then there must be an automatic consequence, because other people's free will is now being inhibited. So, for example, if I come along and bop you on the nose, I have exercised my will out of harmony with the love of you. Right? And I've affected your life. I've forced you into a circumstance or condition that you did not choose to accept. Do you understand? I have forced you, through my will, to accept something from me, which was out of harmony with love, and it's actually harmed your life in some way. It might have given you a blood nose, it might have broken your nose, it might have put you in hospital for 3 weeks while they reconstruct your face. Right? And therefore, all out of harmony with love. Now, if I exercise my free will in that direction, God created a law which then automatically places the feelings of all of that on my soul, whether I acknowledge it or not. But I will at some point in my future existence have to acknowledge it. What you call divine justice, I call the law of compensation. In other words, I am having to have to emotionally compensate at some point in the future for every single unloving act that I perpetrated towards myself or another or the universe. And that's what you would call divine justice. Does that make sense? And I do sincerely believe in that. I've seen it in operation through my life in 2,000 years, every single moment of every single person's existence. And there's only one thing that actually overcomes this law. In other words, God has, if you listen to some of my YouTube presentations, you'll find that God has a hierarchy of laws. Some laws overcome the effects of other laws. Can I give you an illustration? We have physical law of gravity that binds us to the earth. Yes? But I can overcome that law by engaging another higher law, the law of aerodynamics. And when I engage the higher law, I can get in a vehicle that engages this law of aerodynamics that we call an airplane or a jet or whatever you want to call it. And now another law is coming into existence that has the effect of lifting me off of the ground and therefore looking like the law of gravity does not exist anymore for a period of time while I'm engaging the other law. The law of gravity is still present, but because I've got this other law, the knowledge of the other law, which we didn't have 150 years ago, as much as we do now, now that I've got this knowledge of this other law, the law of aerodynamics, I can do or do things that seem to imply that the law of gravity no longer applies. Of course, the law of gravity still does apply, but the law, the higher law, allows it to be as if it doesn't exist. And I'm suggesting to you physically even, there's other laws man has yet to discover that will allow us all to levitate whenever we want to. All right? And once we discover that law, then planes will go out the window and most of us will levitate ourselves instead. And once we engage that law. And what I'm also suggesting is that spiritual laws and moral laws, which are all to do with the soul, all have hierarchy as well. And divine justice is the law of compensation, but above that law are the laws of divine love, which are all about repentance and forgiveness. And rather than going into it now, because we're starting to talk about quite complex feelings that we need to, at some point discover for ourselves, you can actually, there's hundreds of hours of YouTube presentations on the internet that describe the hierarchy of laws, an introduction to the laws, and then describe some of the laws and how they actually have this hierarchical system. Divine justice is a part of the hierarchical laws. But justice is not about, from God's perspective, justice is not about punishment. You see, the concept we have on earth about punishment is this, that when somebody does something wrong, you've got to make them pay. But we very rarely conceive that we've got to help them change. Can you see the difference? Like, one is an intention to make somebody pay for what they've done. Another one is an intention to help them change so they don't do the same thing anymore. In legal circles, they call that rehabilitation. God's laws all focus, including the law of compensation, focus on the rehabilitation of our soul. All of them. They do not focus on punishment for punishment's sake. There's a very big difference between those two states. Does that make sense too? So every single law that God has created, right down to the very basic laws, all have love in them. The law of gravity has love in it. It's a physical law, but it has love in it. Why does it have love in it? Because if we were spinning around as we are at, what is it, about 1,800 kilometres an hour or whatever it is that the Earth is spinning around, and there was no gravity, where would you currently be? We would have spun out into the universe, and within a few moments, because there is no oxygen out there, we would have perished. So the law of gravity, a loving law, keeps us on the ground for the sake of our own personal safety. The law of aerodynamics is still a loving law, I feel, because it allows us more freedom while still honouring our desire to stay in the atmosphere. In other words, while still prolonging our life. So it's still a loving law. So I see every single law as having hierarchy of laws, and every single law fitting in with God's divine plan. But I see divine justice as a lower law in comparison with the law of divine love. And a brief answer, so a brief summary of your question, I do believe God has unconditional love for you, personal unconditional love for you, general unconditional love for you, and personal unconditional love for you. But the personal unconditional love for you can only flow while you choose it to do so. In other words, God honours your free will choice. And God does have divine justice, which I call the law of compensation, but there are laws that are higher than that, that can be engaged, that can overcome the need for compensation. So that's the summary of that.